DMA Vox Populi, where underrepresented voices have a chance to be heard. Sebastian, could you please begin by telling us what Flashes is and when you first started paying attention to the Digital Markets Act as a developer?
Flashes is a visual app for the Bluesky ecosystem, which we now call the Atmosphere. It is a system that is based on an open protocol. At some point last year, I was wondering whether we could work with the social data that Bluesky provides via its APIs and just lay them out in a different kind of format, because a lot of these social media apps actually share common attributes when it comes to the data. A lot of them have text, a lot of them have a title, a lot of them have images in them. So I was playing around with it and figured out, hey, Bluesky has a lot of posts that contain photos and that are really good photos by actual photographers, right? So I kind of laid out the data in a different way, and overnight or so, I got to a point where I said, hey, this looks exactly like Instagram did 10 years ago, where people would share their photos with their friends. So this is how Flash started, to be honest. This is kind of bringing back the old social vibe of social media, where it was about sharing with the people you follow, sharing with your friends, and not so much about the attention economy that it is right now. I always call it more of parasocial media right now. The DMA I came in contact with, I must say I'm a developer, so I'm not a lawyer. So I didn't really know a lot about the DMA beginning of last year. I mean, I knew what it was. I heard about the gatekeeper clauses and everything, but I hadn't really dug into it yet, and I didn't actually know what it could offer me until J.K. Zeiling from the Weizenbaum Institute here in Berlin contacted me, and they do a lot of DMA work. I talked to them and they said, hey, we saw that you are doing this Flashes app and we have a lot of users, and we saw that a lot of users wish to import their data from Instagram. Did you know that you could actually try to get Meta to give you that? And I was like, oh, I did not know that. So LK suggested that I should get in touch with the Data Transfer Initiative, which I did. But the feedback was you actually have to do a lot of regulatory stuff before Meta will give you access. They have different stages that you have to reach that include a lot of stuff that I already do because I'm DSA conform, like a moderation system, privacy insurance, all that. I have that, but there were additional audits that I would have to take that would cost money. And we're talking thousands. Like, it's not super huge, but all of it combined, I realized, was really something that I don't have the capacity to go through at this moment. And I think none of these small developers do. A lot of the people just bailed because they said you have to chase them for the integration. I must say, this is not the way I imagine interoperability. Asking gatekeepers to provide APIs, they ultimately decide what they provide and when they provide it and how they run it. Interoperability, to me, should be enforcing open protocols.
Are the obstacles you mentioned, in your view, mainly the result of weak enforcement, or do they suggest that the DMA as such needs to be improved?
I think the rules were meant to be for developers like myself, but I think the DMA, to me, it seems like they make it way too easy for the gatekeepers. It puts a lot of power still into their court. I have to jump through all these hoops and almost reach a stage where I'm not a small business any longer, but have this corporate structure that can be audited on a regular basis. So in my opinion, just like we have a certain size for gatekeepers to become gatekeepers, I think it would be helpful to have something on the downside as well for really small developers or small companies, that they don't have to have these massive audits before they can play with the big players, so to say. The other thing, I think it would be really helpful to make open protocols mandatory for any of the exchange, because otherwise we're still stuck with the big tech companies defining how they exchange the data. And again, they can come up with so many ways to define APIs that will make it harder for anyone to interoperate with them.
Jean, From your experience across digital policy and governance, including as Secretary General of the French National Digital Council and through your work on Café IA, how would you briefly describe the main problems of social media today? Where would you start?
The problem is a problem of architecture. We have shifted from a distributed architecture, the one from the internet, to a centralized architecture. And I think that this architecture is the core of the problem, and we should redistribute it. It's interesting you mentioned Café IA, because Café IA is a movement designed to support people to organize discussions all over the country about technology and what it does to us. And we created that movement in a very distributed way. We didn't want to be the unit centralizing the movement. I think there is here a new role for the state, which is to support distributed movement, not to re-centralize power and only check on vertical powers, but also to redistribute the power within the society, give the power to people. This is the new role for the state, I think.
When we look at social media today, we tended to see it as something monolithic. How did we end up with that conception?
It's very true. And I would say it's one of the main problems, indeed, that we conceive social networks as one monolith and not as a sum of functionalities. It's in the interest of a company to pretend that there is no other market than its market, and that this structure is actually the market where things happen. All the functionalities that are presented to us as a monolith are in fact different markets from which we are blocked to innovate on because of these giants. They prevent us to have access to other markets and even to perceive and to see that there are markets there. And it is a duty of public authorities to unbundle this monolith into these different functionalities.
Would it be correct to say that the DMA mainly opens access to existing infrastructure, whereas Eurosky is trying to build a different one from the ground up?
Yes, I think so. An open infrastructure and public infrastructure are, I think, the right way to approach this to make ecosystems accessible. And this is what we're trying with Eurosky, to build an open web infrastructure that is then accessible to all developers in Europe and also worldwide, to build the next wave of new social media apps that, instead of building molds around business models, just interact and thrive by integrating parts of each other into their apps. Eurosky aims at not building the next X of Europe or the new German Facebook or whatever. We're trying to be the basis and the infrastructure on which all these new social media apps can be built. This is why we also set it up as a non-profit, because we believe that, learning from the last 15 years of social media, that infrastructure is power, and power should not be held in some VC-funded entity that is in the end run by one billionaire. And this is why we think now is the right time to try a new approach by saying, hey, we as a public infrastructure provider are a non-profit. We're living off grants. We try to back finance the infrastructure by giving developers and companies an opportunity to launch something that eventually make money and hopefully back finance the infrastructure. But ultimately, I see us in one line with, for example, public media.
To what extent is Eurosky about offering an alternative social media service where social becomes important again?
Making it social again is really important to us. The biggest part of this is giving governance back to the user. The user ultimately chooses where their accounts are hosted, where their data is hosted. We offer users to host it as Eurosky in our infrastructure. But because we build all this on an open protocol that does not know modes, that does not know monoliths, users can always move their data to a different provider, or they can take it to their home server that they have in their apartment. It is up to the user. The user also decides what their timeline should look like, whether it's a chronological timeline, whether it's an algorithmic timeline where they can manipulate the parameters based on which the timeline is generated. This is something that we currently work on to give a good recommender algorithm that is not driven towards attention maximization, but rather giving users a good experience with content that they actually like and not something that polarizes and that riles them up to jump in there and comment on stuff. Because this is what we have had so far over the 15 years. Social media is social again, that users are ultimately in the driver's seat and they decide how the product that they use is going to be configured, what data it uses, what their timeline looks like. I think this will give us a new form of social media where through interoperability, the user also has the choice to leave the app. If my app flashes, does mess up, or I sell it to somebody and that person puts ads in there, users don't even have to move their data anywhere. They can just log out, delete the app, log into another app that uses the same protocol and just use that. So users are free to choose whatever they want to do. We haven't seen this before. This is new. Like this kind of open protocol, we've kind of had stuff like this with Mastodon and ActivityPub, which is also an open protocol. But Blue Sky did a good job, I think, in pushing it to the average user. They have made using open protocols and showing that open protocols can actually serve an audience of 44 million users with a small team of only 30 people. This was not really possible years ago. And now we have these tools, they're all open source, they're all usable, and this is something we want to do with Eurosky.
You mentioned that Flashes has been built on Blue Sky. Do you think that, in a sense, Blue Sky for you solved part of the classic cold start problem, since an app like yours did not need a large marketing budget simply to attract its first users?
Yes, 100%. I put zero marketing budget into this app, and I had, in the first week that it was in the App Store, I had over 100,000 downloads for the app. I now have around, I think, 20,000 monthly users. I didn't do any marketing for this. The open protocol that Blue Sky is based on and that let me hook into that fire hose that spews out all this data, right? That is essentially what made that cold start problem go away. I could integrate with their social graph, and the users that I onboarded from Instagram, they didn't know a thing about Blue Sky, but they were interacting with Blue Sky users as soon as they started using the app, because when a user posts a photo on Flashes, it automatically gets displayed to users on Blue Sky, and Blue Sky users can interact with that photo and they can like it and they can put a comment on it, and that comment shows up in Flashes later. And the cool thing, I think, is that the people that have never used Blue Sky all of a sudden are part of this ecosystem that already has 44 million users, and they get immediate traction on the stuff that they do. I have had users give me feedback that said, this is incredible. I've had really valuable comments and likes on my photos here on the day one I posted something. I haven't had that on Instagram for 5 years. This is incredible. So that really showed me the potential of interoperability and that open social graph and that open data format that can bring a real value to any app out there. And that also means that this entire ecosystem in which we build, it only takes 1 or 2 apps to ring in this new huge bubble of users that then can use all these other apps in the ecosystem as well, because your identity is yours in this ecosystem. So you can use your Flashes login to just log into Blue Sky and use Blue Sky. You don't need to create a new account for it. You can use Sill, which is a news aggregator app. You just use your Flashes or your Blue Sky account to log in with it. So whenever there's an app that pops and gets traction, it brings in this new wave of users that ultimately stick to the ecosystem because they see all the advantages that you all of a sudden have when your data isn't stuck in some billionaire's monolith that has a moat around it, but where data flows freely between applications. And if you are not satisfied with one application, you can just use another application because they are all interoperable.
Jean, you are about to publish a report with an important contribution from Maria Luisa Stasi, with whom I work on this podcast, proposing that the interoperability obligation the DMA already applies to operating system and virtual assistants should be extended to social media. What is the core of that proposal?
The core of that proposal is to say that a social network is the connection between people. And if you start from this very strict definition of social networks, then it means that you could build other markets. with other players, with other functionalities, which could compete against the monolith we are facing today on these different markets, which would be open markets. The history of humankind as a whole, it's the history of all our techniques, all our technologies. Every time we build on top of former technologies. Here we are facing an anomaly, and it's an innovation dead end we are facing, and this is nothing natural. It's something that these firms wish for, and they have made everything so that we face this dead end. So what this is about? It is about imagining that maybe moderation on these social networks, these dominant social networks, doesn't have to be as poor as it is now. Maybe other people can provide better services on top of these social networks. And maybe through that capacity, we can change the very nature of the architecture we are facing, because it's all connected. When you are not seen on LinkedIn, and when LinkedIn asks you to pay to be seen on LinkedIn, it's because of their algorithm. If you can provide another algorithm on LinkedIn, then it's something else. If you can provide to people a new search engine on LinkedIn, then something else happens. You're not unseen. You can be discovered. When people look for something, you can be discovered. And this is very important because through vertical interoperability, we can break the nature of the architecture we are facing. And then also, it's a very complementary remedy to other sorts of remedy and initiatives. This is very important to stress. Horizontal interoperability, portability, all these initiatives trying to build other social networks. It's so hard to build another social networks when you are facing like a giant attracting everyone with predatory behaviors, very illegitimate behaviors, building on network effects. It's very hard for other people to innovate and try to create other social networks. So what we have to do is to break the system from within, actually, by providing other functionality that will create some kind of disorder in the machine that was being built by these gatekeepers.
If Europe is in effect trying to move the market away from business models based on lock-in and extractions, what kind of models do you think are most likely to replace them?
First, there are the models of other social networks that are being built aside. I think that we could ease the work of all the people creating distributed system aside by breaking the machine that is impeding people to live. So all the model we could see happen tomorrow are all the model from Blue Sky, Mastodon, or any other social networks trying to propose something else, something different. We have also to break the perception according to which a social network is what exists today. A social network can be many other things. Social can be everywhere. We were deprived of the social component of our activities because social networks attracted all the social dimension of our activities into one place. So we have to conceive that maybe tomorrow social will be on any kind of service. This is something we have to take into account, that maybe social networks will be built in many other places different from today. And a third thing is that maybe we can see new business model being developed on the top of platforms such as the one we are facing today. And this is because also it will happen something with AI. People are adopting AI, people are paying for AI. So maybe something will happen on this side. I don't necessarily wish for, but it's something we should take into account maybe tomorrow. And our role, I think, is to make sure that if we are facing integrated system, then this system remains open for others.
If users were generally free to choose recommendation, moderation, interface, and search as separate layers, do you think that would change competition at the margins or the social media model itself?
I think it would change the social media model itself, because we could shift from an attention economy model to a model where people see what they want to see. And this is completely different. This is an opposite model. It's not a model based on the choice of the platform to show you something. It's a model based, and it's potentially at least a model based on your choice to see what you want to see. and to have access to interfaces giving you the choice to see what you want to see, or to not see what you don't want to see, or to discover some other things. And I love Blue Sky for what it opens in many aspects of our life. Like when I use SkyFeed, for instance, on top of Blue Sky, I can see something like, it sounds very basic. It's about seeing what is the most liked content at one moment, or during the last 24 hours, let's say. I can see where the conversation happens. I can't do so on any other network. This is a huge problem because, in fact, I realize through this functionality that on Gatekeeper social networks, I'm driven to places where I don't necessarily want to go. Maybe the conversation is somewhere else, and maybe I'm driven into some spot where there is no one. If you visualize things like that, then it's like you're deprived of your freedom to move from somewhere to somewhere, or to talk to other people you may want to talk to, and they may want to hear from you. So it could change everything because we could give access to the people to the information they need to drive their conversation where they want and to build a conversation. Because today we are facing one fact, is that we have no conversation. For most of us, we have no conversation. It's a unilateral promotion of a content. And this is something quite sad, actually, because we are not talking to each other, to one another. We are not discussing. And this is something we could recreate. And this is something we see very much happen on Mastodon or other networks. The capacity to engage and to discuss with the people that are relevant to us. And maybe it's people we did not know yesterday that we will discover. And that makes the internet a great thing.
How do we create the conditions for innovation that genuinely responds better to users' needs?
We've been stolen for many decades by these firms who have pretended that they could build the best services in the world. It is not true. Visioconference service that is being built by the French state works much better than Google Meet. And it was built with less euros, less people, and it's good to show them that we can build better services and that it's either they compete on our ground or we leave. But it's very important to force them and to drag them onto our field. And I think that vertical interoperability is a way to crack the system and to force them to compete on our ground.
A recent report by the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, Fractured Reality, seems to make quite a strong case for a project like Eurosky. Which parts of that argument felt most important and most validating to you?
I think it felt most validating seeing that somebody really understand the potential of running infrastructure as a non-profit in a way that we've only seen before, I think, mainly from like public media, right? So I was really, really happy when I read it because I've been working to bring that across for the last year. And whenever we talked to VCs, but VCs really quickly lost interest because there is no money to be made with a non-profit. There is no money to be made with serving open data that anybody can access. So we quickly realized we'll have to approach foundations and other funding models in the EU and in the specific countries that we live in to see if we can get backing for this to run public infrastructure. I think it would be very beneficial to the EU to have social media infrastructure over here because ultimately social media, people think of it as like this fun thing where you can watch videos and stuff like that. But the reality is that it's actually kind of critical infrastructure by now because a lot of the information flow goes through social media and how that can even affect elections. We've seen this in Europe. So having a say in how information is disseminated through social media channels is actually vital, I think, to our whole democracy in Europe. There's still a lot to do when it comes to sovereignty. So I think we need to approach it at all layers. And I realize that we won't have an operating system tomorrow for mobile devices that is all European, but that doesn't stop me from building Eurosky to say, hey, this layer, we have this covered. And seeing this validated in the GRC report felt really good because it's having it black on white saying Eurosky is worthy of strong support by the EU. I realized people actually understand what we're trying to do, and it felt really good.
The absence of a single controlling intermediary creates open space for independent services around curation, ranking, or moderation. How much of the challenge is technical and how much is really about incentives, security, privacy, and making switching plausible for users, etc.?
Good question. Technically, we're part of the developers ecosystem, and it's fascinating because it's being developed in front of our eyes. There is a new app, a new service popping up almost every day in this ecosystem. So we're in the front line of all this, especially with Eurosky, because we're setting up infrastructure ourselves and we solve technical problems every day that haven't been solved before. So I think on a technical level, we have almost all of the solutions there. There isn't like a backbreaker in there that I could think of right now, because we have the different algorithms already built in. This breaking up of these monolithic structures into account management, labeling for moderation, feed generators, all that exists today. It's been developed over the last 3 years and it's ready to put into action. There are already a lot of players that want to get started right now. I'm talking right now to the German federal media. They want to start serving their content via feeds into this ecosystem because they see that the huge potential of inserting media and then having it auto disseminate to all these different apps that reuse the content and they thrive from this remix culture in this ecosystem. So technically, I think we have all the tools that we need to make this good. The challenges, in my opinion, are still business models and financing, because if you don't have a moat around your users, a lot of the money that people are usually putting into companies, they don't see a return value there yet. They say, if you can't monetize users, if you can't use ads, what is there? Because they're still stuck in this old mental model of, okay, social media, the revenue is through ads. So if you cannot do ads, I don't know, I'm out. So that is still something that we're actually engaging actively and working with researchers to build business models for these open web systems. On the other hand, we're also trying to take as much as possible off the shoulders of developers and people wanting to build on this ecosystem, which is why, although all these modules that we're talking about, like moderation and account management, all that, everybody can do this on their own, or there can be other places. But we're just saying, if you don't want to deal with this, we got you covered. We have all these parts, we run them in a non-profit structure, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just build your apps. And this is essentially what I did with Flashes as well, because back then Bluesky had my back. They did all the moderation, all the account management. So I think when it comes to what do we still need in this ecosystem, one is, like I said, we need business models for this. There are some, like subscriptions. We have monetization through external business models that then feed back into the ecosystem. So there are a couple, but they need to be developed out. And the second thing is, I think, quite essential to social media is moderation. And I think working on open protocols and sharing data makes this a perfect example of how we can actually find a moderation model where we don't have to moderate the same content all over again. So there's a big potential there, I think, for getting a good commons content moderation model out there that would then, of course, be in line with the DSA and European laws.
If users of gatekeepers' social media services had the right to choose competing curators or algorithms directly on top of the data they already have, what kind of impact would that have on a project like Eurosky?
I've read in the JRC report that is letting other timeline providers provide feeds, for example, Instagram and TikTok. Eurosky is actually working with one of the researchers that contributed to the JRC report, sorry. So we are working on creating pro-social algorithms. This is an actual research grant that we're chasing right now. Theo Driesen will be developing this algorithm and Eurosky will host it and disseminate it. If this were to happen, we'd be happy to integrate this pro-social algorithm into Instagram, TikTok, or whoever has to implement it then. That would be good. Ultimately, though, I fear, having read the rest of the JRE report, that the business model that is behind all these platforms would not favor any of these algorithm changes because this is their money. This is like their money on the table. The attention-based algorithms are the core part of their monetization model. So I think they're gonna fight this really hard. And I'm never really optimistic when it comes to these guys, but I'm like really looking forward to see how this is gonna play out.
To what extent has the rise of AI changed the significance of initiatives like Eurosky compared with the moment where the DMA and DSA were originally designed?
Oh, interesting. Never thought about this, so I'm gonna spitball it. The rise of AI when it comes to social media obviously comes down to two parts, I think. One is the Gen AI generation right now, or the evolution, I must say, leads to these social media networks being flooded with generated content. The models have gotten so good right now that this becomes a real problem. On the defensive side, if you want to call it that way, AI models can lead to easier moderation. You can use AI models for a lot of the stuff that not like 5 years ago you would have to have humans sit through moderating stuff that none of us would actually desire looking at. And nowadays you can use AI models for that. So it's a pro and contra, if you want to say, the rise of AI for all of this. Ultimately, I must say, although AI helps a lot with moderation, I fear that the part where a lot of slop is now poured out in social media, it puts a heavy burden on social media networks to find a way to either not show this to users or prevent actors from flooding the networks with it, with disinformation and all that. So I think what we're aiming at with Eurosky is definitely to bring trust back to social media and bring social back to social media. If it were up to me, I would say like generated AI images, not really part of social media. Like if you flood social media with generated images, I don't see a really benefit for users there. So interacting with each other, fostering these social graphs that we have grown up with, that is essential, I think, to social media, to actually make it social again and not make it like just media where you consume AI generated images 3 hours a day.
Where do you see the main risks as AI becomes more integrated into social networks?
Thank you for that question, because X has just released a functionality that is powered by Grok, which consists basically in providing different feeds to users. So if you're a premium subscriber on X, you can have access to customized feeds through AI. So it's Grok, which chooses content you may see in customized feeds. This is a huge problem because it adds a layer on top of the black box. You add a service in a vertical integrated system, a service that you can't control, that has been used in the past to do really bad stuff, and is now choosing what you see and pretending that it's a customized feed, but it's a feed that is chosen by a very bad AI. So here we are facing a huge problem if we leave the gatekeepers adding layers over the top of layers. We have to make sure that this extra layer is open to anyone, so to show that, in fact, what Grok is proposing is not the only solution. There are plenty of other solutions that may be proposed to the population, to X users. It's not my choice to stay on X, but maybe people want to stay on X. So what I would want is to change the nature of X by making sure that you can add an extra layer and that this extra layer is not the one built by Elon Musk. This is very important because actually, if you look at social networks, each one of them belongs to an holding company which also owns an AI system. So tomorrow, I think we have to expect that every one of them will try to give us access through their AI to the social network that belongs to us, actually. The social network meaning us, our identity, our profile, our content, our connections. Okay? If we don't have control over this extra layer, then we will have in front of us an even bigger ivory tower. And this is very dangerous.
Commission were to introduce vertical interoperability for social media, what would a good first implementation step look like in practice?
Oh, the first thing I would do, if you ask me, if I were the Commission, would be to call for all the innovators which were deprived of any sort of access to the gatekeeper infrastructure and to listen to them. I would listen to all these researchers who would need to create on top of the dominant players' architecture some tools to make sure that they have the right data at the right time and right access so that they can visualize and understand what is going on social networks. I would listen to all these people and understand from them, from their initiative, what kind of access we would seek first. This is very important. And this is a matter of priority. What would we prioritize? And for this, we should not only listen to the market, but we should also listen to the researchers, to the NGOs, to the CSOs all over the world, and consider what is the main issue you're facing.